Hi everybody, it's Craig and Richard here. So this is the first feedback video for Mindfulness for Wellbeing and Peak Performance. So it's great to be with you and thousands of learners from all over the world. And
8,500 I think at last count.
Yes, and counting. So some really interesting things coming up this week. And so Richard, would you like to talk to the first one, some reflections on stress and paying attention on purpose?
Yes, well, there was a bit of confusion around what we mean by stress in this course. I mean, the classic definition of stress is when we get overwhelmed, when the demands of a situation kind of overwhelm us. But I think through the mindfulness lens, stress can really be understood as fight and flight activation in the absence of anything that we need to fight or flee from. So when that amygdala starts to take over and we get caught up in a fight and flight response, you know, perhaps worrying about something or dwelling on something, that's what really what we're talking about with stress. And of course, mindfulness is a powerful way of not getting caught up in that. Yeah,
projecting this imaginary stressor in our mind in the middle of the night, etc. And we can see that firstly that the mind's doing that, and to secondly see that imagination is what it is.
Yes, and then the ability to just bring the attention back to what we're doing as a way of stepping out of that stress response. So a very powerful thing to do.
Yeah.
And of course we can practice that through informal things, like someone mentioned rock climbing, or any activity that we do if we're paying attention. That's going to keep us grounded and present. Also, of course, meditation is a very powerful way of practicing that.
Yeah. And a point came up, like if we're paying attention naturally to something, you know, you are on a rock face, for example, and your attention doesn't want to be anywhere else than where your fingertips are meeting the rock, then that's a very natural and spontaneous thing to be mindful. We only have to, in a sense, practice being mindful on purpose when we notice that the mind's somewhere else.
Yes.
Not where it needs to be. You know, when we're driving the car and we're in a dream world, etc. The mindfulness bit is to notice and on purpose to bring our attention back to whatever the priority is at the moment.
Absolutely. So that's sort of the concentration aspect of mindfulness. And then there's the self-awareness aspect, which is best cultivated through meditation, but we can just notice what's happening in the mind and the body throughout the day. So there are different aspects. Yeah.
Now, some interesting thing to note that a lot of learners are becoming more aware of how distractible the mind is. An uncomfortable, sometimes surprising, but very necessary first step into mindfulness. One learner was reflecting on when somebody tells me not to think or be distracted, all of a sudden you find that's what the mind wants to do. And nobody, in a sense, has said or telling anybody not to think. If we're self-aware, we do notice there are thoughts coming through the mind. So it's not about trying not to think, because then the next layer of thinking is, why can't I stop thinking? But it's really about being aware enough to make a choice whether we want the attention to engage with the thoughts or to leave them alone. Are they relevant or are they a distraction?
So the thoughts continue, but we don't perhaps get so caught up in them. Maybe that's the distinction.
Yeah, that's right. And also difficulty staying present, you know, in a stressful part of the day, and problems controlling the thoughts. And the standing back, the non-attachment to the thoughts, I think gives us the knack of not being controlled by the thoughts. And that's a slightly different but important distinction, I think.
Yes. Some of the learners this week were worried that we were being a bit too dismissive of mind wandering and being in that default mode. And isn't that perhaps where creativity comes from? I think it's a very good question. And I think that creativity, and the research would back this up, that, you know, we need that default mode activation. We need the mind to wander a little bit so that we can come up with, you know, do some convergent or divergent thinking and come up with new things. But we need the prefrontal cortex to be activated. We need to be able to rein it in a little bit, because otherwise that mind of ours is going to wander way off reservation and just get caught up in stuff that's not particularly creative. So having both together at the same time, I think that's really the key for creativity.
Yeah, and also about sitting in a so-called stressful situation like the traffic. And why not have the mind wandering then? Well, probably if we are stressed in the traffic, the mind is already wandering. It's wandering to, I can't stand this, I wish it wasn't happening, I'm going to be late.
Or the mind's already at home, you know, wherever we need to be, and everything between us and there's an obstacle, right?
Yeah. And so what the stressor isn't necessarily in the situation, it's what the mind projects onto the situation. And so the mind is already wandering into rumination and frustration. So the mindful bit's to bring our attention back to where we are and just let it be whatever it is.
Yes.
And drive safely, for example. But I mean, we can wander if we want to off to something else. But you might find yourself sitting there and all of a sudden you realise when the cars start tooting behind you that your mind wandered and you weren't noticing that the lights had turned green.
But also, what are we practicing in that moment? What are we cultivating? And if that becomes a mental habit of sitting there in the car and being mentally somewhere else, what happens when we do need to pay attention? Have we perhaps reinforced an unhelpful habit there?
And a very subtle attitude to life that I'd always be happier some other place, some other time. And because if we're always wandering into what we think is a pleasant distraction, then we're kind of always creating an idea that here and now is not what I'd like it to be. And probably only 5% of our life will be just exactly as we would like it to be. And
and that famous Harvard research actually found that people who were paying attention were much happier overall than people that were daydreaming, even daydreaming about pleasant things. You know, there's something about being fully present and engaged that just tends to make us happy.
Yeah. There are a lot of learners practicing the commas and finding that they've been very helpful.
Well, that meditation, in a sense, is the foundation of being able to do all this other stuff we're talking about, isn't it?
That's right. So the brief practices can be very, very helpful between one thing and another. Those little brief punctuation marks really help us to sort of reset, re-engage with the next thing. So to pick up something complex, finish and put it down, pick up the next complex thing, put it down. So the mind has got these spaces during the day.
And punctuate the day. I really like this metaphor of punctuating the day with longer full stops and then those short comments. That's such a useful way of, you know.
Excellent. Also some resistance to practicing the mindfulness meditation. Would you like to say something about that?
Well, yeah, I think there are a number of reasons why people do sort of start to resist practicing things, and working through them is actually just part of the journey.
Yeah.
I mean, the moment we set out to discipline the mind and sit and be in one place for a period of time, the mind doesn't want to stay still. It's used to just wandering all over the place, and we get addicted to sort of daydreaming and worrying about stuff. And so the moment we try to rein it in a little bit, it starts to react a little bit. And that's just a normal part of the journey of learning to practice mindfulness. I think the best thing to do is just to pay attention to what's happening in the mind that's actually encouraging that resistance.
Yeah. I mean, the mind will do, being a creature of habit it is, will do almost anything to resist being mindful. And so we shouldn't be surprised that that turns up.
No.
But we can be curious about it. We can be not judgmental, but just curious. That's interesting. Look at all the ways, the thousands of ways the mind has to avoid being mindful.
It's like exercise. There's any new habit. In the beginning, it's kind of hard, but after a while, it just becomes easier with practice. And paying attention to what's making it unpleasant is a very important step.
Yeah. Cool. So some really excellent discussion. So I hope on the discussion, boards, that you really keep those great insights and questions coming. Follow Jen and Sherelle as well, our mentors, who are going to be providing some excellent feedback throughout the weeks. And please, if you can, just try and stay in step with the course, 1 week at a time.
The mentors certainly focus on 1 week at a time.
That's right.
And it's also important to really practice and apply things rather than just rushing through and doing a sort of a conceptual version of the course.
Have time to consolidate each week and then move into the next week and get more out of it that way. So next week will be, I just wanted to mention as well, one of the learners produced a PDF for the Mindfulness Practice Record that can be used and filled in electronically. So thank you very much for that. And so a lot of our other learners might like to use that. So it'll be made available for you. And so next week we'll be looking at mindful stress reduction and cultivating gentleness and curiosity, and also being more mindful in everyday activities. So we'll start practicing that right away ourselves. Hey, Richard?
Sounds good. See you next week.
See you then.